I've got to apologise. I've lost 5 books of the Old Testament. Well, I haven't really lost them. Until this class I hadn't realised I hadn't put them in. And then I prepared them, I put some new slides in. They're on my stick, and my stick's still on my study table, so it's, unless you want to come round to my house for, what we'll do is, it was the poetic books that Frank mentioned. I thought I hadn't seen them so far, yeah. You're right, Frank, you hadn't seen them. But anyway, we'll move on. The good books, enjoyable books, and a lot of insight and good stuff in them. So we'll just move straight fleetingly into the New Testament, have a quick look around there, alright? If I can find my mouse, there we go. Yeah. I'm feeding it too much, that's what it is. No. Alright, so here's the New Testament. We talked about the difference in covenants a couple of weeks back, so that's all taken care of. And here's our New Testament. Let me check. First have noise. The breakdown, that's just a background slide, so we'll come into a little bit more detail in a second. Okay, like the Old Testament, we break down the New Testament into manageable chunks. And the first manageable chunk we call the Gospels, and that's Matthew to John. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. The New Testament is very easy to memorise. If you like to memorise the Old Testament, it starts off Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and all the rest follow after that. The New Testament is even better. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, all the rest follow on. It's right. Anyway, 4 books, Gospels. Obviously they deal with the life of Christ. And as we saw in our covenant deal, they're really, though they're in the New Testament, nothing, that even though they're in the New Testament, it's actually part of the Old Testament because Jesus lived and died under the Old Covenant, under the Jewish law. And these Gospels were written about his life, so therefore they deal with that time. But having said that, in and out of it and through it, as Jesus taught about that which was to come, he gave us an insight into what kind of kingdom he was going to set up. For example, in Matthew chapter 16 to 18, he says, I will build my church. And then he turns round to Peter, because Peter had said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he says, upon this statement, this rock-solid statement that you've made, I will build my church, and I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. And Peter, obviously, when we come to Acts chapter 2, he stands up on the first day of Pentecost, and he uses the keys, he uses the gospel message for the very first time to bring people into the new family of God, the new relationship, the church of the living God. Okay? So, most of Matthew through to John is still Old Testament stuff. And the New Testament, when Peter uses the keys, the first day of Pentecost, he opens up the new family of God, the new relationship with God that's built upon the blood that was shed by Jesus on the cross, the sacrifice of Jesus confirmed by the death, burial and resurrection. Jesus is who he claimed to be. All these statements he made were found to be true. He says at one point, he says, I will die and be 3 days later I'm going to be raised again. And that all came to pass, but his resurrection took place. And therefore he was. And Paul, writing later on in Romans, beginning in Romans, he says, he was proclaimed to be the Son of God through the resurrection. It's really the basis of our salvation, is Jesus was who claimed to be. God in the flesh died in our place. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke and John is the history of Jesus' life and his dealings with the people, and little glimpses into what he was to set up in the future. For example, you could say that in Matthew, with the Beatitudes, chapters 5, 6 and 7, the blessed be the poor in spirit, blessed be these, blessed. All these blesseds were really, some would say, that's the core of the New Testament teaching that became a reality in the church. And the people that would flock to Christ were going to be part of that kingdom of righteousness that he describes in that. So therefore the rest of the New Testament then becomes how that becomes a reality. So when you move out of the life of Christ, Jesus dies, he's buried, he's resurrected. You see Acts starting off. Acts is the history book of the church. It's how the church first began. So from very first Acts chapter 1, where Jesus dies upon the cross, when Jesus is seen before his ascension, and some of them turned out to be part of the 12 apostles. Then you see the history of the church. And Paul, you know, we think the church should be perfect and pure and excellent. If that was the case, we wouldn't have half of these letters. Because Paul writes these letters to help struggling churches, to help struggling individuals, to help to understand more about God, more about Christ, more about what the family of God is all about. And so we have those letters there. And the Hebrew writer, there's always been an argument over, did Paul write the book of Hebrews, or didn't he write the book of Hebrews? Most people would say he didn't write the book of Hebrews, and yet it's a very powerful analysis, if you like, of the Old Testament seen in the New Testament. The Old Testament concealed and the New Testament revealed. And the quality of the writing and the scholarship is really insightful and helpful. And so some people say, well, Paul wrote that in a good day, and other people say, no, the way it was written, it can't match what Paul says in these other letters. Sort of a question mark over that. Then you have the general letters, James to Jude, and then you've got the final book described as a book of prophecy, where John, the oldest apostle, still alive, off in prison in Patmos, and he then gives us the rolling out to the future, if you will, of the church and province. So 4:12, 4:1, 21:1. 4:1, Okay, we'll come to that hopefully. So the four Gospels then are the biographical books. Biographical, the bio, the life of Christ, the story of the life of Christ. The first from Matthew, one of the 12 apostles. It was a narrative especially adapted to the Jews. Each writer of the Gospels has a particular audience in mind. And if we understand the audience he has in mind, then the questions he asks and answers within the book are helpfully understood against that background. There was I was trying to think of some sort of joke I could tell that would help to recognise if you recognise the audience you're speaking to, then it makes more sense. The question makes more sense, you know. I can't think of it enough. Forgot it anyway. So anyway, but it is important. Frank used to teach, and I've read it in some other books, when you come to the book of Hebrews, that there are 7 serving men. Who, why, where, when, and another 2.
I had 7 serving men. They taught me all I knew, the names of how and where and why, and when, and if, and all gone this way.
That's it. Now, was it, who wrote that? Was that Kipling?
Oh dear,
I can't remember.
I'll have to think about it.
Anyway, and these are the questions we'd ask when we look at the Bible. You know, who's speaking? Who's he speaking to? What's the background he's trying? What's the problem he's trying to deal with? If we can identify those things, then the questions we ask and the questions the writer asks or is asked of the writer make more sense, because we then understand the answers and why there was a problem and what the problem was and how the early church dealt with that problem. And so it's important then to know who spoke, why he spoke, and what his audience was. It's not super important to know everything. For example, like the book of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote it, but we know his audience were Jews. And know his audience were, well, we'll come to that a little bit later when we come to Hebrews. But anyway, so it's important to know. So Matthew, some people say he's the gospel of the King, because he shows Jesus as being the Messiah, the King of the Jews, that the Jewish nation should have been waiting for, should have been ready for. And that's why when you come to, for example, John the Baptizer, and he's telling people, you know, you guys need to get your act together because the King's coming. And that's why, writing about John, he says he is preparing the way for the King. Now, even when the Queen comes to Corby, what happens? The toilets get a clean up, the cabs get a sweep. Even some of the stuff gets painted. If you stand in the wrong place, you'll get painted if you stand there long enough. Why? Because the Queen's coming. And suddenly, the town we're used to is transformed into a wonderful looking place overnight. Alright? Well, that was the way before an entourage went before the King, there would be this forward party. And they would clear all the junk off the roads to make it easy for the King's chariots. And they would flatten some places that were a bit high, a bit knotty or whatever, so the King would have a straight and easy run. And John the Baptizer was that man. 400 years of silence from the Old Testament. And then John the Baptizer comes along and says, the Messiah, the King you've been waiting for, he's coming. You better get your act together. You better repent of all this junk that you're doing at the moment and get your act together and become good Jews again, because your king is coming and you need to be ready for him. And so he prepares the way. And that's helpful for us to understand when we see the readers that Paul's writing, that Matthew's writing to, and help them understand that background. The king is coming. The Messiah is coming. We need to be ready. We need to start our act together. It's all this wishy-washy, half-hearted Judaism needs to be swept in the touch. We want to be good Jewish people, ready to meet the Messiah and ready to back him whatever he wants to do. Of course, the problem they had initially was that they were thinking the Messiah would come in a big white charge, a big white horse, take on the might of Rome and set the Jewish nation back on the fast track again. Of course, in Isaiah, he also writes about the suffering servant. The suffering servant. And the Jews for years had problems. Where's this victorious king? That we can understand. A suffering servant? What's that all about? And when you put the two together, that Jesus was not only the victorious king, because he conquered death on our behalf, but he was also the suffering servant, the one who went to the cross on our behalf. Now we understand that now.
They should have been worried about him coming back in that kind of way as well, because they weren't doing what they were meant to do.
That's right. That's right. John didn't mince his words. You brooding vipers who warned you to flee from the wrath to come. You know, you guys have been overpowering people with your authority, making all sorts of little rules and regulations, petty things, to keep people under control. He says the king's going to blast through all that, and you're going to be in the way. You need to get your act together. You need to repent of all that, and be as you ought to be. And of course, they didn't like that one bit. Okay? And the problem with Jesus is, ultimately, he was going to set up his own kingdom, the church. And what's going to happen to all those people who are in positions of authority under old Judaism? They're going to get kicked to touch. They're going to lose their power. Here's the people who, you know, clear the way. I'm one of the top people around here. Just get out of my way. You know, make place for me at the head of the table. I'm an important person. And suddenly Jesus comes along, and he wants us to be saved, sinners saved by grace. And these people in power and position are not going to be able to have that. They're not going to be able to walk all over people, because Jesus says you're all equal. He doesn't say one guy ruling you. He says you walk into a place. Don't pick the top place for yourself. If somebody even more important comes up, the owner of the house might say, "Excuse me, can you move down a couple of tables, because this guy I think is more important than you are." He says, you know, if you go into a house, he says, choose the most lowly place to sit. And then, if the housekeeper comes in and he thinks he values you, he's going to say, "Oh, don't sit there. Why didn't you come up to the top table? You know, you're worthy of sitting at the top table." Not because you serve a badge with me, I'm worthy of the top table. No, because you as a genuine person are somebody he wants to share with and give honour to. So all that's going to go by the wayside. So Matthew's writing to these self-important and often Jewish people, and he shows Jesus in such a light that Jesus just really trashes all that. People, he says, "You want to be great? You want to be great?" He says, "Be the servant of all. Learn to serve properly." What? But if I'm great, I expect people to serve me. He says, forget all that. If you really want to be great, you need to serve others. Have an attitude of service, and put service into action in your life. So there's tremendous stuff in here, really. And it's all in the book. It's excellent stuff. Okay. So, Matthew, writing to Jews, help them to come to terms with the reality that when the king comes, they need to change their way of thinking. They need to be people, servants of the people, instead of ruling it over the people. And just to be ready for the king to come and be prepared. Mark, on the other hand, John Mark, a brief, picturesque book, emphasizing the supernatural power of Christ over nature, disease, and demons. He's writing to a Roman background, more. All the way through the book, one of the famous words he used is, "and immediately." Jesus did. Jesus, for Mark and for his audience, because the Romans were a very powerful, action-based people, Mark says, "You Romans, I'm going to tell you about a king. This king, you'll love him. He's a man of action, just like yourselves. He's somebody who gets the job done. Jesus immediately did this and immediately did that, and he overpowered all sorts of forces. Romans were always interested in power. They respected power. And Mark demonstrates Christ as somebody with power. Power even over nature, stilling the storm, power over disease, the ability to cure people. And unfortunately for the Jews, power over forgiveness of sins. He could forgive people of sins. And the Jews said, you can't do that. Only God can forgive sins. But Mark said, no. That's who he is. God in the flesh. Welcome. Have a look at Jesus. The man of action who has the ability to empower you in every aspect of your lives. Okay? So, a good book. A lot of people, when they read the New Testament, they're recommended to read Mark first. A, because it's a shorter book. But B, because they see Jesus, the man of action, the man who cares, and the man who identifies with people and helps them to overcome some of the problems and challenges they have in their life. Yeah.
Probably the first book to have written.
A lot of people say that Mark is the first book to be written. Yeah. There's argument over that. We'll come to that later on. But it is, by a lot of scholars, they think Mark was the first one to be written. And it, as I say, it highlights it to the Romans. The powerful character of Jesus, the man of action. And really for teens, you know, if you want to introduce kids to Jesus, that's the book to start with. Because Jesus is a man who gets things done. And he's doing here and doing there and doing everything. And he's empathizing with people, but it's a man of power and authority. So, Luke, where did he come from? Anyway, Luke, the only Gentile writer, Luke was a Gentile physician. He writes two of the books of the New Testament, the book of Luke and also the book of Acts.
What's a Gentile, Graham?
Well, what's a Gentile? Okay, a Gentile is a non-Jew. Oh. Anybody who's not a non-Jew is described by the Jews as Gentiles. As a matter of fact, they go further, they talk about Gentile dogs. Okay, if you're not a Jew, then you're second class, alright? Basically, that's how they look. But poor old Luke was no way second class, because some people, when you come into the book of Acts, some of the commentaries of the book of Acts say that Luke's Greek writing is really the writing of a scholar. Of course, we call him Dr. Luke. He was a doctor, he was a physician. He was a man of letters, he was a man of education, and he spent a lot of time with Apostle Paul. When you read the book of Acts, there's a lot of parts of chapters to talk about, and we went, and we did, and we came to. And all those we bits are where Luke was also involved with Paul in that part of the narrative, okay? So, he was a great man, obviously did a tremendous amount of good, and he writes in the book of Acts, he talks about to Theophilus. He writes what he calls a treatise, a laying out of the historical thing that he was involved in and he's heard about. He did the research, probably from Matthew, probably from Mark, because Mark also went with Paul and had contact with Paul at different parts of his life. So he gathered together lots of information that was from the early Christians, and then he put that together. As some people say, Theophilus is a particular person. When you wrote a book in this time, in this era, you probably didn't have the money to do it by yourself. So a book was sponsored. Somebody would pay you to write the book, to have the time to do the research and the time to do the writing. And so some people say Theophilus was probably an important man who Luke then wrote his treatise to as a true, actual, factual, historical biography of the life of Christ in this case, and in the book of Acts, the history of the early church. So both books written by Luke, very powerful, very accurate. I think it's was it Ramsey?
Sir William Ramsey.
Yeah, Ramsey, I think, who said he went out to disprove the New Testament, and he used the book of Luke as part of his means of doing that. And he went everywhere that Luke talked about. And his conclusion, about 3 years later, he became a Christian, and he well, follower of God anyway. And he turned around and he says, if Luke wrote about it, it was there. You know, every place that Luke went and described was there. The story is told in the Old Testament. Now, I know Frank knows and can tell it better than me. The story told about David in the Old Testament when he was attacking Jerusalem, and when he'd been attacked by people in Jerusalem, he climbed out of a little channel of water to get up to the top of the thing. In the Second World War, there was a gun emplacement, a British gun emplacement, were being shot at by the Germans from exactly the same place. And the British guy, who knew his Bible, read the Old Testament, he said, this is familiar, I know where this is. And he says, I bet, and then behind that area there should be a little river going all the way up, a little stream of water going all the way up to the top. And he sent his men in there, and they went up, and they did the gun emplacement at the top. Because there was that reality of biblical history. The Bible said it, described it, and it was there. And so Ramsay, in his turn, comes round to Luke, and he said, I'm going to show this Bible as a load of rubbish, basically. You don't need to believe this. And by 3 years later, he turned around and said, if Luke...
20 years.
20 years later. I've got something free for somebody in my mind. 20 years later, he turns around and says, if Luke writes about it, it's there.
I've been reading all that this morning, Graham.
Have you? Very good.
The whole history of that.
Okay.
He started out, he was convinced that the titles and the place names and the dates used by Luke couldn't possibly be right. And he was convinced of that. And he said that he set out to prove him to be wrong. And then he wrote a book at the end of that. And he said that the writings of Luke can be subjected to the closest possible scrutiny, and everything that he says is proved to be true.
That's right.
Absolutely. And by the way, he was a Scotsman, by the way.
And not Luke. No. No. The first Scotsman described in the Bible is way back in Genesis. A guy called Jock Tan.
Oh, right.
Anyway, so beloved physician, most complete biography of life of Jesus, portrays him as the Son of Man, full of compassion for the sinful and for the poor. The humanity of Jesus, the empathy of Jesus, and all those aspects of Jesus. So here we have Jesus the King, here we have Jesus the man of action, and here we have Jesus the humanity. Now obviously all three Gospels portray Jesus in all those things. But the main thrust of each Gospel is in those three areas, okay? Every one of them describes an aspect of Jesus the same way, but they also have their strengths. These three were called the Synoptic Gospels. That's the synoptic means similar Gospels. There's a more technical word for it, but we'll put it at that in a moment. Now John comes along and he writes last, and his Gospel. Matter of fact, it's interesting. They discovered later on. Do we do it later on or sometime? Maybe not. Later on, I'll show you a piece. They discovered a piece of Matthew. They reckon from about 75 A.D.
John.
No, earlier than John. John Rylands.
The piece of John Rylands, yeah.
Yeah, they've got a piece of John Rylands. Yeah. This last couple of years, they've discovered a piece of Matthew as well, and dated from about 75. So, so that shows it was around. You know, it was a historical book. Some of the scholars, you know, you've got to watch some of the scholars, even biblical scholars, people who are religious and go to church and claim some sort of religious Christianity. When you read some of the writings, you wonder, you know, where they've been, where they're coming from. Because when you get up to a certain point in certain scholarship, you think you know better than anything else. And some of these guys say, oh no, you can't believe in that, you can't believe in this, you can't believe in the next thing. The German Higher Critics School, about 1925, they took the whole Bible apart. And then they realised they couldn't put it back together again. And you got real into colleges and universities, and some of them are still around today, are still being taught in our universities today. A guy called Wellhausen was very popular at a particular time, and he discredited all sorts of the Bible teaching. And we still get him, where people quoting Wellhausen today in our universities to our young people. And Wellhausen was kicked into touch. He was shown to be totally out of touch with the real reality of the archaeology in the real world. And so he was proven to be false. But still in our universities, in our theology colleges, Wellhausen is, oh, you know, Wellhausen said blah, blah, blah. And it's bad news, you know. So there's lots of people who make a real bad mess. You need to be careful when you read, and that's an important lesson actually. When you're reading a commentary or something that somebody's written about the Bible, always try and find out who the guy is, what his theological background is. Is he a real liberal scholar who doesn't really believe? There's some people who claim to be at the top of the tree, like for example some of the bishops of Durham in times past, top of the theological tree. They don't even believe in Jesus, and they're heads of theology. You know, they talk about Jesus wasn't a historical character; he was just a myth, and all that. You think, what? Now some of them write real good stuff, but some of them write real trash, and you've got to try and work through that.
Is that grand?
The Bishop of Durham. Bishop of Durham changes every now and again. They get a new bishop every now and again. But some of them, they've been known, if you like, for their liberal leanings for many, many years. And so therefore you've got to be very careful with some of the writing and some of the stuff you hear from them. Because really, it's a base. For example, going back earlier, there was a load of people who said who didn't believe in miracles at all. And that included the miracle of creation, obviously. There'd be evolutionists and stuff like that. They wouldn't believe in the virgin birth. They wouldn't believe that Jesus was God in the flesh. They didn't believe in any of the miracles the Bible talked about in the Gospels. They just rejected them out of hand. One guy who was actually the head of the Methodist Church, a guy called Weatherhead, when he came to turning water into wine in John chapter 2, he said, no, he didn't really turn water into wine. What he did was he poured out some water, and the MC, the guy who was in charge of the ceremony, said, oh, you know, you've kept the best wine till last, but it was really only water. That was he was the head of the Methodist Church at one time, really respected guy, Leslie Weatherhead. They should be called Leatherhead. Anyway, but you see, and these are religious people. And a lot of people who listen to these religious people get the wrong idea, because they no longer believe in the historical Jesus. They no longer believe in the Jesus of the Gospels. They no longer believe in creation. And they no longer believe, they believe in more a social gospel. Jesus, if you like Jesus, he'll make you a better person. You know, he'll make you a nicer person. But some of them don't even believe in heaven and hell and all that type of stuff. Anyway, so you've got to be careful who you read. What's the background of where they're coming from? And if you're careful about that, then you understand, you can pick the good stuff out and sort it out.
What do you think of these life study Bibles?
Well, the background of that guy, the Life Study Bible, was for a particular purpose, and do a good job for what they do. But the background, ultimately, of those, the guy's faith alone, and the guy's obviously believes in miraculous. So those two things for today. So those two things colour sometimes how they use the passage and the advice they give you. But having said that, it's such a good Bible and so much the help is really helpful that you can't throw the whole lot out for that. when you're Bible, somebody the opposite extreme as well. You've got some people who say the only Bible you should read is the King James Version. You know, that was what was good enough for Paul, it's good enough for us. Okay, all right. But that's 400 years out of date. The language people just have difficulty understanding the language. Now for them, they're on one extreme. On the other extreme, you have stuff used like the Good News Bible and stuff like that. The way they translate from the Greek is very loose.
Yeah.
So there's some passages, though it's easy reading and easy to understand, there's some passages that lean too far over into carelessness, if you like, with the Greek. All right. So they're good for. Matter of fact, I used to, in my bedtime reading, I used to have a Good News Bible because it was so simple. I didn't even think about the words. But a good Bible student would have 2 or 3 Bibles minimum. Frank had about 49 Bibles. Okay.
No, that's
39.
30.
That's all.
One of my programs on the computer, I've got 22 different versions. You know, so if you're studying seriously, then it's good to have an understanding of different texts, how the translators looked at them, the theological background behind them, and usually one-man translations, one man can't get it right for everything. The King James was good in its day because it was 70 odd writers who all came together to check each other's work and work in the text. The same with the Revised Standard Version, the same with the New American Standard Version. Large groups of scholars looked at the text, and some people even today say that one of the best translations was the the original American Standard Version.
American Standard.
1901, was it?
I like the
American version.
revised Standard Version.
Revised Standard, that's about the same age, about 1900.
Yeah.
They were good texts. A lot of the stuff that the archaeologists had dug up helped them to understand the Greek better, helped them understand how it was used in the 1st century, because words changed through time, and so they had a better feel for the language. There's one word, I think it's in the Beatitudes, as a word that's used, something to do with bread, and nobody knew. Was it bread? It was some word anyway that nobody really knew how it was used in spiritual context. So there was always a debate about, did Jesus, was that an original word, or did somebody put that word in? Because it wasn't really understood. And then about 10, 15 years ago, they dug up a bunch of stuff, and here was the same word used by a woman in a shopping list.
All right.
And the way she used it in a shopping list helped them to understand the implication of how it was used, because it came from that era, in that context, you see. So you've got all sorts of stuff goes on in this type of thing. So it's a heavy duty stuff, you want to go that deep. But having said that, in the simpler version, the wider translation you read, because different translations are translated in a different way. Some are trying to get the text really accurate. Translation. Whenever you translate from one language into another language, you've got to make decisions on how that word. Frank, give us an example of Dutch to English translation.
Yeah. Well, for God so loved the world,
Yep.
want also lief je God de wereld gehad, dat hij zijn enige geboren zoon gegeven heeft, opdat en ieder die in hem geloven niet verderven gaan, maar eeuwig leven hebben.
Okay, and how is that? If you were to do that in literal translation.
For also so much love God the world has for that his only son he had given has. I mean you can't really construct it.
See, that's what happens with translation.
Let me give you one that's not a biblical one. The little boy knocked down by a red bus.
Yep.
Door de rode bus aangereden jongen. By the red bus knocked down little boy. That's the sentence construction in Greek too is different. Yeah. And that's why if you can get a Greek translation with a word for word English translation underneath, you get an idea of the feel of the language. Let me just, I'm not going to,
that's okay.
One sentence. A principle is a translation made by a group of scholars is inevitably better than a translation made by an individual, because he's going to put his own ideas into the translation. Yeah. When you get a group of scholars working on it, they check each other's work.
And they're more accurate. Okay? So there are some translations that if we were to translate directly into English, it would make the English very, very difficult to read, because the words, there's no exact equivalents sometimes, and they state them slightly different. So what translators try to do is try to get a balance between something that gives you the text, but you can read it, and then other translators, they try to give you the thought rather than a direct translation word. They just say, okay, this is what the sentence really, this is the impetus of the sentence. Now when they do that, you're more likely to get a loose translation, because they're taking a bigger view.
The Amplified's like...
Yes, the Amplified's good in that way. So when you come to translations, this is something to be aware of. That's why it's good, you ask the same questions. Who wrote it? Is the one-man translation? Is the group translation? Is it Jehovah's Witness translation? So if Jehovah's Witness translation, John 1, God, in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was a God. Because they don't believe that Jesus was God in the flesh. So he said a little God, an idol God rather than, So they take the theology and they bring it into the text. And that happens in lots of different translations. So that's why you have a comparison. For example, the Authorized Version in Revelation chapter 169, chapter 169, it talks about we are kings and priests unto God. But the actual Greek translation, proper translation, is we are a kingdom and priests unto God. Now you see the difference.
Yeah.
I'm not a king. Jesus is king,
Out of the kingdom.
but I'm part of his kingdom. See, so even the best, even the translation Paul used has good problems. All right. So it's good to have a comparison. That's that's what's helpful. If you're really, doing proper study, you want a couple of different translations. You understand where they're coming from, and so therefore you understand which is the better translation of a particular sentence. Okay, but it's complicated stuff. But really, to know somebody. Was it Kierkegaard? I think it was Kierkegaard, one of the great philosophers. When he retired, he took his New Testament. Somebody said, "What are you going to do now you're retired?" And he says, "I'm going to take my New Testament. I'm going to have a little plot of land. I've got a cave. And I'm going to sit down. And I'm going to try and study the Word of God." He'd been doing it for years. And somebody asked another question. Kierkegaard again. Somebody said, "What's the of all your theological in-depth stuff you've done all your years, what's the one thing that you've really understood and come to terms with?" And he turns around and says, "Jesus loves me, this I know." Jesus loves me, this I know. Karl Barth.
At the conference, they asked him, what's the greatest thought that's ever occurred to him? He said, "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so."
Okay? And Barth was among theologians, he's way up there. Big thinkers, okay? And that's important with us. We don't need to know everything about the Bible. We don't need to know all the technical stuff and do the heavy-duty stuff. The real key effort, we need to know Jesus. And he loves us. And that's really what we need to know. That's what he tells you. All the rest is a bonus. Somebody, we used to have a teacher who used to say, Bible study is like going to the ocean by the beach. And he says, you build a little moat. So you get your little bucket and you walk down to the sea and you go to the sea, fill up your bucket, you come back and you put water in. And then somebody comes along and says, "Don't do that, you're going to empty the sea." He said, "No." He said, as a theology scholar, as a Christian, you can go to the Bible time after time after time and fill your bucket up as much as you like, because it's deep enough to take you as deep as you want to go. Okay? But not all of us can go that deep. Some of us like to paddle in the shallow water, and we'll do that all our lives. And there's other people who think, "No, I'm confident in the shallow water, I want to go in a little bit deeper." And as deep as you want to go, that's as deep as the Bible will take you. Okay? But at the end of the day, what you really want to know is that Jesus loves you. God loves you. God sent his Son to die for you. And that you can be saved through his Son. And that's the real key. Once you know that, all the rest is a bonus, really. And all the rest is a challenge to be like Jesus, to live like him. Can you think of?
No. Today, by the way, I'll tell you this. I was reading of the Professor Robert Greenleaf, who's the Professor of Law at Harvard University, and he's written a book there which is one of the classics of legal work. They are the principles of evidence. And he was an atheist. And he was convinced that the story of Jesus of Nazareth and his resurrection from the dead is a hoax. But he put himself to study the evidence in those 4 books. It changed his mind. And he's written another book, the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, judged according to the principles of evidence. He said these men couldn't possibly have been lying. It must be absolutely true. And he devoted his life to Christ. Changed.
Right.
Now listen, studying the evidence. They've tried to show this is wrong. It's either myth or a fable written just by some men writing a story, but it's been proved to be true.
Right. So it's three in one night.
There's more examples of that kind of thing.
That's right. Loads of real, real thinking people who've gone out of their way to try and disprove the Bible, and the very fact of gathering evidence to disprove it we found the evidence is overwhelming. It's true.
Yeah.
You know, that's good news for us.
You
We don't-
mentioned William Ramsay.
Yeah.
He's a professor in three universities in this country, 8 other doctorates throughout the world. He's written 19 different books on Middle East. He went to the Middle East to study what it has to say concerning the Bible in Asia, Mesopotamia. 20 years he spent on it, and he was convinced that everything that you read in the New Testament is absolutely accurate. He didn't believe that anybody could write as John wrote, for example, or as Luke wrote, maybe 80 to 90 years after the events. But he said absolutely accurate.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
But the trouble is, many people don't listen, don't read the evidence. They listen to what somebody says. The Bible's full of mistakes, full of contradictions,
Yeah.
and they never examine it.
That's right. So that's helpful for us, okay? But we don't need, I mean, he spent 20 years on that, okay? And there's lots of men, I know, what was it, I always get to quote Roman Spurgeon talking about John 3:16. There's exaggerated, he spoke 10,000 sermons, and I can't see, it's almost impossible to think of it like that. But he certainly preached a lot of sermons in John 3:16.
Yeah. Oh, that was a young fella. It's actually D.L. Moody that tells the story of an Englishman preaching in New York from John 3:16, and he preached for 6 nights from it. Then the 7th night he said, "I've looked all day for a new subject to preach on, but we can't find anything better than the old." So he went back to God so loved the world that he gave his son.
So I mean, it's good for us. We, you know, in all of this Bible study background I'm giving you and stuff like that, you don't need to know it. You need to know Jesus in order to get to heaven.
That's right.
But if you want to be more solid in your faith, and you want to help other people to see Jesus more clearly, then some of this stuff helps. It won't help everybody because they don't all need it. But some of it will help somebody at some point in the future. When people challenge you about the Bible, then this stuff will help you to defend yourself against those challenges. So we'll just have a quick look at John before we finish up, wrap up. John is almost sometimes described as the eagle, the book of the eagle. The eagle is the only bird, as far as I understand, that can actually look directly into the sun and not get blinded. I don't know, I've read that a few times, different places. I don't know how true, how accurate it is. But the picture of John is helping us to look right into the very gates of heaven itself. Jesus, the deity. Jesus, the Christ. Jesus, the Son of God, the one who came from glory to be with us and to die for us. So he was familiar with the other 3 writings, and who dealt with the birth and the life of Jesus, but he takes it up just a little notch, if you like, and gives us more evidence as to the deity of Christ in many different facets. So a lot of people love the book of John. It's just a good book, full of good stuff. Very helpful, very powerful, and it's, you know, and those 2 words, time after time, come out through the book. Faith and eternal life. John helps us to understand we need to see Jesus clearly in order to have faith in him, and if we have faith in him and trust in him, we're going to have the eternal life that he promises. And the book is full of that. And he says at the end of the book, chapters 20, 22, 21, he says, many other books were written, but these are written, what I've written, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the focus of his writing, the power of his writing. Jesus, the one who died for us, who loved us and died for us. So that's the 4 Gospels, okay? And well worth a read in any approach, whether you started Martin, whether you started Mark, whether you started Luke, whether you started John. Take the time to read them. Some complicated stuff in there, but lots of good stuff in there. You see the humanity of Jesus, you see the King of Jesus, you see the power of Jesus, and at the end of the day, he's the one who is revealed as the one who died for us and brings us to life. Okay, so we'll hold it there. Goodness, we've done 4 books already. Ray, would you lead us a word of prayer?